Okay, so hello and welcome to today's Info2Go webinar. My name is Annie Gaines and I am the Continuing Education Consultant here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries, located in chilly Boise, Idaho. Our webinars and other continuing education opportunities are funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Everyone is muted and we encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions and discuss with other attendees. As you exit the webinar, you will be prompted to complete an evaluation, and we always appreciate your honest feedback. Today's topic is Flannel Board STEM, and our presenter is Jennifer Redford from the Idaho Commission for Libraries. Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you so much, Annie. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen. Oh, there we are. Okay. Welcome. So today I'm going to share tips and tricks on how you can incorporate STEM into your flannel board practice. And good news, you're probably already doing STEM in lots of different ways when you're doing flannel board activities, usually in a storytime setting. We're just going to talk a little bit about what that looks like and what the research behind some of the activities that you're doing are, and hopefully give you some tips and ideas to try new things, or maybe extend the learning a little bit during your flannel board practice. So my name is Jennifer Redford. I'm a youth services consultant at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. I have a master's in library and information sciences from the University of Arizona, and I worked in public libraries for about 10 years before I moved over to my current role at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. And I've been in that role for the past 4 years. When I worked in public libraries, I did lots of story times in different settings and for different age groups. And I've since moving away from working in the front lines in public libraries, I've done a lot of training for library staff on how to do different elements of their story times, including how to structure story time, how to use music in story time, how to use voices when you're doing books, and how to do flannel boards. I'm really excited to kind of focus in on this one particular skill. Sometimes when we do trainings, we get really broad. So it's nice to just like focus on the one element of your story time and really take it apart. So before we get started, Annie's going to put up a poll to see where everyone on this call today is at in terms of how you're using flannel boards during your story time. So you can answer, yes, I use one in almost every story time. Always, I do flannel boards all the time. Sometimes if it fits with the rest of my story time. Maybe some of you have tried it and it didn't really work for you, or maybe some of you have don't have any confidence or don't really have any knowledge when it comes to using flannel boards, and you're here to learn. So go ahead and vote. We'll give you a few seconds. I remember when I first started doing story times, I thought flannel boards were a little old-fashioned, and I'm constantly surprised at how this tool keeps reinventing itself. And the flannel boards from 14 years ago, the way they were done are totally different than the way they are done now, but there's still some consistency in there. Okay, we'll give you a few more seconds to vote. Okay, Annie, can you show us the results of our poll? Okay. Awesome. We have a good mix of people who use flannel boards all the time or some of the time. And then we have a great number of people who are here to learn. So all are welcome here, and we will have something for all of you. So thank you. Okay. So I want to talk a moment about what do I mean when I say flannel board? And a flannel board is kind of a catch-all term at this point. That refers to usually a piece of fabric that is either flannel or felt, and it's attached to a large board, but it can also be like glued or taped to any flat surface, basically. And you use corresponding flannel or fabric pieces to attach themselves to the board structure. So usually you've got these two fabrics, and because of the kind of softness of the materials. They cling to each other. And so you're able to manipulate and take the piece of fabric off and put it back on in a different spot. But really, you can do a flannel activity with lots of different types of materials. So I will say flannel board, but I also mean felt. I also mean Velcro. I've seen a lot of people who will laminate, who will print out and laminate shapes or characters and then glue a piece of flannel to the back. Some people have done these with magnets, so using a cookie sheet. And really a lot of flannel board activities can even be done with dry erase markers. So there's a lot of flexibility out there in terms of the materials. For the purposes of just talking about this today, I'm going to say flannel board, but really I'm talking about a wide variety of materials that can be used to serve the same purpose. During today's talk, we will talk about what is early STEM, because that's kind of the focus of today, is doing STEM with flannel boards. So we need you to understand what early STEM means. So that's STEM for those younger years, the kids that will be coming to your story time. We're going to focus a little bit on early math. And why that's important, especially in your flannel board story time element. And then how to do different STEM activities using flannel boards. And we're really going to take a deep dive into different types of concepts and talk about those. So let's talk about STEM. What is STEM? STEM refers to fields of study in science, technology, engineering, and math. And STEM learning is an interdisciplinary approach to education. And when I say that, I mean that those 4 STEM fields connect to almost every other field of study. So while they're often taught separately, and we have our math class and our science class, when we're in a formal education setting, they can really only be understood when combined together, and that when you're learning other things, you are learning STEM as well. For example, in English, classes in America are often taught to diagram a sentence. So you pick out the different parts of the sentence and you identify the verb and the noun and all the different pieces and requirements of a sentence. And when you think about that, those rules of grammar are a type of science. And the structure of the sentence, the way that the words are assembled in a certain way, is a type of engineering. So when you really get to thinking about what you're studying, these elements of STEM are embedded throughout most of what we learn in different ways. A lot of art relies on spatial relationships, understanding geometry or color theory. Music relies on the physics of sound and mathematical cadence and pitch. And in young learners, when your brain is just super new and still developing, every experience that young children have are interconnected. For example, in the early years, children's early literacy and language abilities are engaged in every experience that they have. Every time a child learns a new word, doesn't matter what they're doing, that is new vocabulary added to their brain. Playtime is used to build vocabulary, background knowledge, phonemic awareness, you name it. So for young learners, everything is STEM in a way. And they're always trying to kind of figure out their world and understand things. And so specifically, STEM in early childhood is about opening doors for children to play and engage with different materials and activities and really have those hands-on experiences to explore the natural world, the human-made world, to explore their environment. STEM in early childhood is about creating opportunities where children are able to try new things, to test ideas, to take safe risks and make mistakes as part of the learning process, to develop new understandings, knowledge, and vocabulary, and to connect their past experiences and knowledge with their future learning. So why STEM? In this really great report from the Joan Gantz Cooney Center called STEM Starts Early, the authors note that Brain and skills building experiences early in life are critical for child development, and high quality early STEM experiences can support children's growth across areas as diverse as executive function and literacy development. And so remember what just a few minutes ago when I talked about how children try to understand their world, understanding rules and behavioral expectations is those types of like rules of conduct and things like that. Those are really important for children, not only because they are a STEM skill, but it's also important for executive function. Oops. We also know that math and logic learning are imperative to later success in school and life. There's been a review of longitudinal studies on school readiness that has found that early math skills, particularly understanding numbers, is a greater predictor of success than early reading skills. I'm just going to say that one more time. Early math is more important for later learning and later academic success than even early reading success. And when we say longitudinal studies, for those of you who aren't like reading research all the time, or if that phrase just kind of caught you up. So those are different research studies where they've followed children from a very early age and tracked their learning progress throughout a certain period throughout their lives. And there have been more than one, in fact, many, that have indicated that having a really deep understanding of numeracies and early math skills lay a better foundation for early learning than even having some of the early literacy skills that we often focus on in libraries. And so back to STEM in early childhood. Children are natural scientists. Young children, starting from birth, constantly wonder about the world around them. They observe their environments, they observe people interacting around them with their senses and their bodies. They have all sorts of different tools that they are using to kind of calibrate themselves and understand what's going on. They ask questions and form ideas about how things work and what things might taste like or smell like or look like. They test out their ideas or their hypotheses about what they've observed by recreating things they see and hear. They form conclusions based on what has happened. And each of these steps that I just outlined that children are engaging in every day by just being a child in the world, those are all part of the scientific process: observation, hypothesis, experimentation, analysis, conclusion. And while the scientific process for preschoolers looks a lot different than for like a high school student or even an actual working scientist, when you strip it down, preschoolers are moving through the scientific process all the time. They're moving through the steps on a daily basis. They are probably engaging in more science just in their waking life than most of us do in like a year, right? Every experience is new to them, and everything is they're observing everything new. They're wondering about it. They're making a guess about what that means. They're testing that guess out. They're kind of figuring out, they're analyzing what happened, and they're drawing a conclusion and maybe iterating on that. So it may be helpful as you are going through the rest of this and kind of thinking about the children that you work with to picture them as tiny little scientists at all times, because really that's what they are. Their brains are primed for learning and they are in scientific mode all the time, and we can help them out. So for early learners, basic concepts lay the foundation for both STEM and early literacy. And so I'm going to take you through a series of some of these like very basic concepts that we use to engage young learners. And we're going to talk about what that concept is and how you would use that in a Flannel story time to engage STEM learning. So as we're going through these next few parts, this is where we're really talking about Flannel board practice and what you're doing in story time. So those of you who are consistently using Flannel boards or sometimes using Flannel boards, please feel free to include your ideas or share your experiences about what you're doing with flannel boards in your story time in the chat. And I will try to keep up with you as we go through those. Okay, so our first one is kind of obvious. A basic concept for kids to learn are shapes, right? Identifying shapes help children understand the different properties of objects. And it can be very tempting to just like show a child a picture of a triangle and have them memorize that's a triangle. But what you want to do in your storytime practice, in your flannel board practice, is to identify the properties of the object. So the reason it's a triangle is because it has 3 sides. And if you showed a child an equilateral triangle, so one that has 3 equal sides, or if you showed them like an obtuse triangle that has a really wide angle and then one really long side, if they've only been shown the equilateral triangle as an example of what a triangle is, they may not realize that the second shape is also a triangle. So what you want to do is say the reason it's a triangle is because it has 3 sides. The reason that this is a circle is because when you start in the middle of the circle, the edges are all the same distance from the middle. The reason it's a rectangle is because it has 4 angles and it has 2 long sides and 2 short sides. Or the reason this is a square is it has 4 sides that are all the same size. So you can really just do a shapes activity during story time that is just identifying the properties of different shapes. And as you do this more and more, if you get the same kids over and over again, they will be able to tell you why that shape is that shape, why it's called that shape. Also, identifying and understanding the different properties of objects is really like, that's a basic science skill, right? We might not think of it as science because we're grown-ups. We know all this stuff, but it's all new to kids. And so we need to lay a foundation for them to really start understanding the elements that make up different objects or different things in their environment. So understanding shapes will help them later. Understanding these 2-dimensional shapes will help them later identify the 3-dimensional shapes. And also help them, we know that sometimes shape recognition is a precursor for letter recognition. So when we're talking about some of those early literacy skills, we know that kids who can kind of understand the properties of shapes have a better understanding of letters when those are introduced, and numbers. So use different shapes in your story times, talk about their properties, and then try to show kids different examples of the shapes and maybe different sizes of the shapes too. So if you have the 2 equilateral triangles and you have one that's big and one that's small, are both a triangle? Is it different because one is bigger or smaller? Talk about things like that. And I guess I do love the question, how do you know? How do you know that it's a triangle? Thank you, Allie, for putting that in the chat. All right, so the next basic concept that you can easily do in a flannel board story time activity is colors. Being able to recognize different colors is an important STEM skill and forms the foundation for mixing and blending colors, and helps build a background knowledge that is important for later learning. You can do this with the flannel pieces. You can just have children, identify the different colors. You can have them sort colors, like these are considered cooler colors on the color wheel, and these are considered warmer colors on the color wheel, or these are like more neutral colors. You can have the children put colors in like a rainbow order, which is something that is really popular at a certain, like for a certain age group when you get to school, is you put the colors in rainbow order. If you're able to get like non-fabric pieces, get like clear acrylic plastic pieces or mag tiles and hold them up to the light and blend colors. That's always a really fun activity too. Not necessarily with the flannel boards, because you're kind of, if you're using fabric, you're kind of restricted to the one color. But there are lots of ways that you can encourage kids to think about what happens when you mix colors. And we know kids love to mix colors. Yeah, Allie said that she does a color scavenger hunt where she hides different colored objects around the story time room for us to collect. That's a great one. You can always have kids, if you're wearing a green shirt, stand up, or all the blue shirt people stand over here, and then all the green shirt people stand over here, and let's count how many, and then you can make a graph of it, of how many people in the room are wearing a green shirt, how many people are wearing a blue shirt. Oh, Jenny says that she pulls colors from a bag and then the kids find the colors on the picture or on the board. That's great. So again, lots of fun with colors, a great activity to do, very engaging for the kids. Remember, these STEM activities are ones that engage their brains and their senses as well. So sometimes in story time, it can be a little passive, right? You're reading a book to a child and they're listening to you. This is a way for you to kind of get them as more active and participant in the story time. So naming objects and understanding the names of objects like chairs, books, tables helps children build vocabulary and understand that objects, things in their world, can be defined, classified, and organized. So this is very similar to the shapes discussion that we just had. But it's not just with shapes, right? So you could have a very deep philosophical conversation. What makes the chair a chair? Why is it that way? Because we sit on it, because it's shaped a certain way. But for a lot of kids, we know that, picture books contain a lot of really rare words that kids normally wouldn't hear in the course of a day. Also, those pictures are going to introduce them to things that are outside of their known experience or their lived experience. So really putting names to things and helping kids build that vocabulary and background knowledge of their world and the world that we live in is very important. A lot of times, the kind of classic activity that you do with kids and flannel boards is retell a story, right? So we read The Very Hungry Caterpillar, and now we're going to retell the story. So before you get to that piece of it, you can hold up each of the elements of the book and have kids identify the different foods that the caterpillar eats and talk about what they look like, what they might taste like, and really have a chance for kids to really engage with that piece of it and identify the different elements of the story before you get into that retelling of the story piece. And again, classifying things, defining them, organizing them. These are all very basic STEM concepts. Again, you're probably already doing something like this in your story time. So you can build a little time in and maybe just take it a little bit further and make it a little bit more engaging. Oh my gosh, a conversation about why wallpaper is hard. That's a very interesting conversation. All right, the next concept is comparisons. So early STEM involves concepts that are natural for young learners, and kids need to organize their world and classify their world. They want to understand things that are alike, things that are different. They want to explore opposites, and they want to make comparisons. Things are bigger, things are smaller, things are different colors than that other color. Things are, something is missing in this picture, something was here and now isn't here. So you can use comparisons during your flannel time by comparing big and small pieces, very simple, like we did with the triangles earlier, which one's bigger, which one's smaller. You can compare opposites. So again, big and small, far and near, lots of different other types of sun and moon, lots of different kind of opposing ideas that you can bring in. Young and old, great one. You can identify things that don't belong. So you might have like two houses side by side on your flannel piece, and one house has a chimney and the other house has, I don't know, like a computer coming out of the house like that. We don't have computers on the roof of our house. That doesn't make sense. So, or you can have two houses that look very similar, but there's subtle differences. One has a purple door, one has a blue door. So identifying things that belong, things that are alike, things that are different, and making comparisons, even matching things. If you have pairs of things, like there's a lot of sock stories out there. You can choose your favorite sock story and then have a bunch of different pairs of socks on your flannel board in all over and have the kids match the pairs up. Or you can even bring socks to your story time and have the kids match up the pairs. That's a great one for you to demonstrate for parents too about how they can do early math when doing laundry time with kids. Yeah, how would you represent some of the opposites like near and far on a flannel board? That so one thing you could do is get away from the flannel board, right? You have an item that is maybe actually near you and have a child take the item to the other side of the room and it's far away. Which one is near Miss Librarian or which one is farther from Miss Librarian? You can play with perspective and make it like have a house there and an item that's kind of close up and one that's farther along the flannel board that's smaller, and from the perspective it looks like maybe it's farther away. So lots of different ways to think about it. All right, patterns. So even infants can understand patterns and routines very early. Toddlers build on their understanding of patterns and routines to create their own patterns and recognize patterns. Pattern recognition is an important early math skill and early literacy skill. You can use flannel pieces to create patterns and then have children help predict what the next element in the pattern is. And this is that pattern recognition and prediction skill takes a kind of a long time for kids to master. So the more chances you can give kids to identify very simple patterns, A, B, like red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, what's the next one? Having that opportunity to predict what happens next is really engaging for kids. It's a really important STEM skill as well. And remember, prediction or a hypothesis is an important early part of the scientific method too. So I think patterns in flannel boards are kind of a natural connection. You can make all sorts of different shapes or colors into patterns. You can make your patterns a little bit more complicated. You can put a line of shapes and maybe take one or two away and have kids identify the pattern. You can make it progressively harder or easier, kind of depending on your group. But those pattern recognition games and pattern prediction games, again, that's an activity you can probably do in every story time, just as a way to get kids thinking about identifying patterns and then making predictions. And we know that kids like a routine, they like patterns. So pattern recognition is something that should come easy to them, but when you try to connect it visually and articulate it for a child, that can be sort of the stumbling block. So you need to give kids opportunities to get it wrong, try it out, and do it again. Similar to patterns is sequences. So preschoolers learn how to follow rules and follow directions and recognize sequences. These are all basic STEM concepts that are foundational to processes like the scientific method and computer science. So in computer science, when you write a code, what you're doing is you're writing a set of directions for like the hardware of the computer to follow. So you're telling it first you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. So it's a set order that things need to happen in, right? Recipes are very similar. So a recipe is a type of sequence, right? So first you mix your dry ingredients, then you mix your wet ingredients, then you mix them together. then you add your spices and you put it in the oven or whatever. But you have to do those things in order, right? You can't just put everything in the oven before you mix it up the proper way, because you're going to get something that does not taste delicious. So when you're able to do some sort of sequencing activity where there's a set of instructions or a set of directions to follow, this can be really helpful for kids to kind of understand how to put things in order. And then one of the best ways to do this is to retell a story that they have maybe heard or that you've just read together, and then you retell it in a different way with the flannel pieces. So again, we're moving from that passive activity of hearing the story to a more engaged activity where kids are helping retell it. If you have a small enough group, you can give each of the kids a piece of the story and have them put it on the board when it's time for that element to come into play. For example, if you're doing Go Away Big Green Monster, we know you kind of build up the monster with the pieces and then you take the pieces away one by one throughout the story. So, but they have to be put on the board and taken away from the board in order. Or the similar with like There Was an Old Lady Who Swallowed a Fly, or basically any book, we know that they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. These are narrative skills as well, as following the order of the book. And so giving children the opportunity to retell the story and engage in that sequencing activity is also a STEM skill. And I'm sorry, the chat has gotten away from me. I will try to catch up. Okay, let's talk about engineering. So understanding spatial relationships contributes to an understanding of engineering. And one activity that you can do to encourage this skill is to create something out of loose shapes. So a square with a triangle on top of it could become a house, or a rectangle with some circles on it could be a truck or a train. So giving kids the chance to kind of build or engineer an object with many different shapes is a type of very basic engineering, and it's really helping them understand spatial relationships so that the wheels go on the bottom to make the truck or the train go, or the triangle goes on the top because you need a sloped roof for this to keep the snow off your house. When you're doing things, and basically anytime you're using the shapes with your flannel piece or your flannel pieces, give children access to vocabulary that describes spatial relationships. So you want to say words like over, behind, around, under, through, and you want to demonstrate that action with the flannel pieces so that they understand it as well. Because remember, kids need to learn this. They aren't born knowing what around the corner means, or go through the door, or find this object behind whatever. They need to have a chance to understand what it means in different contexts and also use it themselves. So use that spatial relationship vocabulary whenever you can. And all of your flannel activities don't have to necessarily be tied to a book that you're doing or a theme. You can just have flannel time where you are building things with flannel pieces, where you're engaging with the kids in different ways. So if it makes sense for you to do a little engineering activity, or just play with shapes for a little while, or shapes and colors, or identify the shapes and then have the shapes create an object, that's a great way to help kids engage with engineering. I take a sip of my tea. So I think my favorite type of flannel activity is this concept of logic and problem solving, which is playing games that use the process of elimination or deductive reasoning. So these are times when kids can make a guess about something or play a game. And the classic activity is my favorite flannel activity, and it's Little Mouse. Little mouse, little mouse, are you hiding in the blue house or greenhouse? So here's the setup. You have your little mouse flannel guy, and you have 4 or 5 houses of different colors, right? And you hide your flannel board from the children, and you hide your little mouse behind one of the colored houses. And you ask the kids, okay, kids, we have 5 houses. What color houses do we have? And they say, like, we have a red house and a blue house and a purple house and a green house and a yellow house. Great. Where do you think little mouse is hiding? And they all like argue with each other and they vote. And finally we decide on red. Okay. And so we all say together in our little rhyme, little mouse, are you hiding behind the red house? And we take the red house off the board and little mouse is not there. So we have to decide, we have to choose one of the other 4 colors and decide where little mouse might be. So you put the red one back and you say, okay, what color should we do now? They all like talk about it and they go blue. Okay, so we decide on blue. Little mouse, are you hiding behind the blue house? And you open up and you take the blue house off and little mouse isn't there. So you put blue house back on. Okay, what color should we choose now? And you're like, okay, we know he's not in the red house. We know he's not in the blue house. We have 3 colors left. What color are we going to choose? Green. Great. Little mouse, are you hiding behind the greenhouse? And we take the greenhouse off and there's little mouse and we all cheer. And then we play that game over and over and over again until probably story time ends, because they could probably play that game for hours. And it is not just little mouse, because you can make any 2 rhymes you have. Little duck, are you hiding behind the blue truck? Or yeah, if you're doing the 3 little pigs, or three little pigs, in which house are they doing? Lots of different ways to kind of do this game where you are finding the missing object, right? And having kids engage in a game, but it's also deductive reasoning, right? They're kind of trying to figure out, well, it can't be this and it can't be that, so it must be one of these 3. Again, very kind of basic, but for kids, they really need as many chances as they can. All right. Before we move on, let's check in with the chat. So Char did notice that all of those spatial words I was using were prepositions. Thanks, Char. Looks like the hide and find game is pretty popular. Oh, clouds hiding behind different numbers. That's great. And honestly, if you Google the little mouse flannel rhyme, you're going to find lots of variations. And I'll share a few resources at the end of different places you can go to look for some of those. Oh, library card, where did you stray? Which type of book are you behind today? Ah, love it, Barb. Okay, let's move into, remember earlier when I told you how important early math was, and I kind of left you hanging there because I just said, oh, numeracy is important. Let's dial into that a little bit more. So those early math skills, particularly understanding numbers, being a greater predictor of success in early reading skills. Those early math skills specifically are called ordinality and subatization. So ordinality is understanding that numbers represent a fixed amount. So the number 1 always means 1 of something. And the number 2 always means that there's going to be 2 of an object. Using fingers to count and having other tactile counting experiences helps children understand this have a deeper understanding of this concept of ordinality, which is just understanding that the representation of the number 1 represents an amount of one thing, or the representation. So when you see the number 2, it represents an amount of 2 of something. You can do this lots of ways during your flannel activity. You can help children count the pieces that you're putting onto the board. There are a ton of counting games that go with flannel boards, like 5 Green and Speckled Frogs. These are all songs too. 5 Little Ducklings, 5 Little Pumpkins. It's a lot of 5s. So as you're doing those counting songs or counting rhymes, have the kids engage with the numbers by either helping you with the flannel board pieces if they're able to, or if they're able to hold up the numbers. So if you're doing like 5 Little Green and Speckled Frogs, When you're at 5 frogs, they're holding up the number 5. And when you're at 3 frogs, they're holding up the number 3 with their hands. This also gives them some of those fine motor skills of actually, like engaging with the numbers with their fingers. But having that tactile experience of counting the number and also counting it on their hands can be really helpful too. So ordinality, we want kids counting. Anytime you can do counting, anytime in your story time, but especially with your flannel board, very important. And then the second skill was called Subatization. And this is being able to recognize kind of smaller amounts within a grouping without counting. So we just said how important counting is, but we also want kids to, for example, when you have the 3 bears up on your flannel board, know that that's 3 bears without having to count how many bears do we have? 1, 2, 3. We want to see the grouping of 3 bears and say that's 3. And this isn't for like giant amounts, and this isn't for estimating. This is just, for example, amounts that you would maybe roll on a dice. So you roll the dice and you get the number 3 or the number 6, and you see the dots and you know that's a 3 or a 6. So many of you will do activities, and you'll find a lot of these on the internet if you're new to flannel boards, that where things are grouped in groupings of 3 or 5 or 2. And so whenever you have those smaller groupings, have the kids say, hey, how many of the bears do we have up here? How many of the ducklings are up here? And have them kind of get used to making those, like just seeing the smaller sets of numbers and understanding what the number is, what the number that it represents. So early math can be boosted lots of different ways. Besides ordinality and subitization, we've talked about some of those, like matching and sorting things. You can like sort objects into like colors, like shapes, like sizes. That's all great. Once you have things sorted, you can also create a graph of different things. Graphing is another really fun way to engage with math. And kind of data collection, which is an important science skill. We talked about identifying properties of the object, comparing objects, putting objects in order, so smallest to largest. That's usually the like classic one for most younger kids. Working with patterns and sequences, understanding spatial relationships, understanding engineering. Those are all really important math and science concepts. All right. And we talked a little bit about using STEM language, but again, it's really, your story time is a great opportunity to introduce that STEM vocabulary, to introduce the language, and give kids a chance to try it out and use it too. So things to do is to stop and count everything. Just build counting in to your routine when it comes to your flannel boards. Let's count this, or how many do you see? I really loved the question we had earlier in the chat was, how do you know? Can you tell me how you know that's a triangle? How do you know what's going to happen next? Give children a chance to explain their reasoning and explain what's going on in their brains. Not only are you giving them, a chance to participate and engage, but you're also giving them the chance to verbalize something and try out words, which is really important for kids. So give them the floor. Try asking questions that encourage kids to compare, use the spatial directions and the prepositions, like we said, above, under, behind. Ask about colors and pattern. Use words like compare, equals, less than, more than. Is this amount of fish on this side of the board less than or equal to or more than this amount of fish? So you can set up those really basic equations for kids to follow, and just give them a chance to kind of play with the language, but also use it yourself. So don't be afraid to say things like equals or greater than, more than. use the language and give that gift to the kids of the language. Okay. Any questions before I dive into some really great resources for Flannel board and STEM? You can throw them in the chat. Yes, and I did like Allie's idea of mixing up how to count. So, and you know, some kids have a really hard time counting like 1, 2, 3, and they want to use their thumb, or I need to ask my son, I have a 4-year-old who's in preschool, and I need to ask his preschool teacher how they do counting, because somehow he has managed to learn how to count to 10 with one hand. Like he has other different symbols that he's using, and I need to ask her if he invented those, or if that's something that she can do it. Okay, how would we represent engineering on a flannel board? So engineering is kind of spatial relationships, right? So that can be creating a picture or a house or a truck or something out of shapes. So you can use different shapes to create something. Just the, if you're doing like retelling a story, placing the first thing that happens in sort of the what is that, the right side of the flannel board or the left side, depending on which side, and having the story progress, placing the objects in a way that makes sense. That's all engineering, but really it's about understanding spatial relationships between objects. So you just have the kids play and make a mosaic with the shapes and see which ones fit together and which ones don't. Julie says, anytime I come across a great book that would make a good flannel story, I make it. 10 on a sled is good for predictive. Yes. And yes, if you are able to, you can, oh, sign language, of course, Angel, thank you. If you're able to create your own flannel pieces, or you have that crafty gene, yes, anytime you come across that perfect book, you get this like itch. You're like, oh, I've got to make that into a flannel. For those of you who don't have that, you can definitely try to find printables online and just laminate them and put them on your flannel board. We've got a good counting game in here. Flannel shapes, and then use blocks to try to recreate it with 3D shapes. That's a great engineering activity. Yeah, you can teach 3D vocabulary too. Okay, Ali says, a really hard math concept I've been working on is incorporating estimation. Words like ish, about, near, sort of, related to subitization, but realizing they don't exactly need to be right. Yeah, and there's that really great jelly bean book that has like 1 million jelly beans at the last page. I don't know if it has actually 1 million, but it's great. Yeah, all right. Well, let's talk about some resources. So I'm gonna shout out my favorite, basically my go-to blog for most storytime stuff is Jaybrary. Oh, and I do want to say, yes, Annie is putting links to all of these in the chat. And then when she sends out a link to the recording of this webinar, she will also send out links to all of this. So if you're not catching the links right away, do not worry, they will be given to you. So we have Jaybrary, and they have honestly a really great selection of flannel activities and other activities. If you're doing story time and you're kind of like, you need a refresh, check out Jaybrary. They do a great job. Flannel Friday is a blog. It's also a hashtag if any of you are using social media in different ways with hashtags, but for a long time, the library storytime community, just collectively in America, we all decided Flannel Friday was happening. And so people would post their flannel ideas with the hashtag Flannel Friday. A lot of those are captured in the Flannel Friday blog. So it's a great one. In terms of some of the STEM information that I shared, A lot of it was from reading research from the Erickson Institute's Early Math Collaborative. They have a lot of really great ideas too, totally worth checking out. And the Bay Area Discovery Museum has done a lot of research, and they have some toolkits for early learning that they've developed, and they have a really great accessible, and by I mean accessible, easy to read research papers on early math and the importance of early math and early learning. I always like to direct people to STEMI, which is a website that will give you resources for innovation for inclusion in early education. So if you're looking to make your flannels, your story times, and just your experiences with STEM and young children more inclusive for kids of all abilities and all neurotypical kids and neurodivergent kids, all kids, check out STEMI. They have some really high quality resources. The Stanford Dream site is development and research in early mathematics and education. And I love this site, and it's so funny to me because every once in a while a librarian will email me and they'll be like, did you know about Stanford Dream? And I'm like, I know, they're so good. I should probably talk about them more. But they have great resources again, and lots of great research to kind of back up this idea of STEM learning and early math learning for early childhood. The Idaho STEM Action Center, the link that you'll be given is a link to a series of videos on early STEM that were done with the Boise State University Childhood Center. They have a daycare that's on campus, and they did an early STEM initiative with the STEM Action Center a while ago. And they really talked about, there's just a series of pretty short videos about engaging with STEM concepts for early childhood. And they're fantastic. The videos aren't very long, and they come with little guides and resources for further learning. And then, because you can never learn enough, right? We're librarians, we always want to keep learning. I did want to direct you to some additional places that you can learn more about early STEM and young childhood that the Idaho Commission for Libraries has created. So in our niche academy, we have a tutorial called Storytime 101. It's a little bit longer, and it does take you through everything from planning your story time to evaluating your story time. And there's a huge section that's just on performing story time. And there is a section specifically just on flannel boards. Most of the information that I gave you today will be included in that. But if you want to get some a little bit more story time information, check out Storytime 101, especially if you're new to Storytime or if you have colleagues who are new to Storytime. We also have an early STEM module or tutorial on Niche Academy. That one's not as long, but it's also jam-packed with all of this research that I just shared with you, plus a little bit more expansive. It's not just flannel board focused, right? And then Countdown to Coding is another Niche Academy tutorial that is specifically how to do computer science in your story time with preschoolers and young children. So computer science can be a little intimidating, but when you strip it down to kind of its basics, a lot of the concepts that we talked about today are also computer science concepts and can help children kind of lay a foundation for the next literacy, which they're going to need to know, which is how to interact with their digital environment. So you can help them lay the groundwork for that with the Countdown to Coding course. All right. And with that, I will thank you. We have about 6 more minutes if anybody wants to throw any other questions or comments in the chat or resources. And I just want to thank you for your time and for being interested in this topic. I love geeking out about library stuff, about storytime stuff, and it's been really fun to just dive into flannel boards, which again, super fun. And I can't believe I did this whole presentation without actually showing you a flannel board, but it happened. Really, PowerPoints are like flannel boards for grown-ups, right? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, as folks, feel free to type your questions in the chat, or if you have extra resources to share, put them in there and we can put them in that email that I'm going to send out. This has been super informative.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah, not seeing any questions, but seeing lots of thank yous.
Okay, stop share. Woo.
So thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you everybody for attending. This was wonderful. I'm going to stop the recording now.